The mop glided across the marble floor in slow, deliberate strokes, the soft squeak of rubber against stone, the only sound in the empty hallway of the 21st floor. It was early, too early for most guests to stir late enough that the night staff had already vanished into the service elevators. The Grand Orion Hotel in downtown Chicago never truly slept, but at this hour it held its breath. Callie Tran moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had perfected invisibility. Her navy uniform blended into the shadows, cast by the recessed lighting, the name tag on her chest, catching no one's eye. She had been here for 4 years, long enough to know every scuff mark on these floors, every faint smudge on the brass railings that no amount of polishing could fully erase. Long enough to understand that the people who stayed in the suites above never noticed the hands that kept their world spotless. She paused at the end of the corridor, wringing out the mop with a practiced twist. The water in the bucket was gray, now tinged with the faint chemical scent of industrial cleaner. Her hands, rough from years of the same motion, ached faintly in the cold air seeping from the vents. She flexed her fingers, watching the steam of her breath dissolve against the chill. From somewhere beyond the frosted glass door marked Executive Conference, private use only. A muffled voice drifted out, low at first, then sharper edged with frustration. "Excuse me, can someone help translate? Please, I'm about to lose this deal." The words carried through the heavy door, urgent and raw, slicing through the stillness like a crack in glass. Callie froze her grip, tightening on the mop handle. She recognized the voice, Logan Whitaker, the young CEO, whose face occasionally appeared on the covers of business magazines stacked in the staff break room. Whitaker Dynamics, the tech prodigy who had taken his startup public at 30. His name was whispered in the hotel with the same reverence reserved for celebrities. But now he sounded nothing like the confident figure from those glossy pages. There was desperation in his tone, the kind that came when everything was slipping away. Another voice followed, calmer, but clipped someone on a speakerphone perhaps. Then Logan's again, stumbling over syllables that didn't belong to him. Ni, hao, ching, king ni, bang wo. The Mandarin was halting, painfully awkward, the tones wrong, in ways that made Callie's chest tighten. She understood every word. Not just the words, the weight behind them. The plea for help. The fear of failure disguised as politeness. She glanced down the empty hallway. No one else was here. The morning shift hadn't started yet. The security cameras blinked red in the corners, indifferent. Callie had spent years making sure no one noticed her. She entered rooms when guests were out, left them flawless before they returned. She knew the rhythms of this place better than anyone, the way the elevators hummed at certain hours, the exact creak of the service door on the 19th floor. She had built her life around being unseen. But now, standing there with the mop dripping slowly onto the marble, she felt something shift inside her. A memory surfaced unbidden, her mother's voice soft and tired, after long shifts at the nail salon, speaking Mandarin to customers who never learned her name either. The voices from the conference room grew more tense. Someone said something sharp in Mandarin impatience, clear even through the door. Logan's response was a frustrated exhale. Callie looked at her reflection in the polished brass of a nearby wall sconce. The woman staring back had tired eyes, hair pulled into a practical knot uniform, slightly wrinkled from the night's work. Just another shadow in a building full of light. 3 steps. That was all it would take to reach the door. Her heart beat harder against her ribs. She had learned long ago that stepping forward only led to disappointment, that staying invisible was safer, easier. But the voice came again, quieter now, almost defeated. "Please, someone..." Callie set the mop against the wall with deliberate care, the handle clinking softly against the baseboard. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. She wiped her hands on her uniform pants, though they were already clean. Then slowly, she walked toward the frosted glass door. Callie had always preferred the back entrances. The service elevator at the Grand Orion smelled faintly of bleach and linen, a scent that had become as familiar to her as her own skin. She arrived each morning through the staff door at 5:55, badge scanned, head down, blending into the stream of housekeepers, porters, and kitchen workers who kept the hotel's gleaming facade intact. Her apartment in West Loop was small and tired, the kind of place where the radiator clanked like an old man clearing his throat and the windows stuck no matter how hard you pulled. She brewed instant coffee in a chipped mug, black and unsweetened, while the city outside slowly woke under a layer of January frost. By 6:30, she was on the bus, earbuds in, but no music playing, just the quiet hum of the engine and the rhythm of her own thoughts. 6 years earlier, everything had been different. She had been 22, a linguistics major at the State University, specializing in East Asian languages. Her professors had called her gifted. She could read classical Chinese poetry with the ease most people read the newspaper, and her translations of Tang Dynasty verses had earned quiet praise in academic circles. She had dreams, then real ones, of becoming a literary translator, bridging worlds with words. But dreams were fragile things. Her mother, May, had worked 12-hour days at a nail salon in Chinatown, saving every tip for Callie's tuition. One evening, May collapsed at the bus stop after her shift. No insurance. A sudden stroke. The hospital bills arrived like an avalanche, hundreds of thousands of dollars that swallowed everything they had and more. Callie dropped out in her final year. She sold what little they owned, took the first job she could find, waiting tables, then moved to night shifts at a downtown hotel. Cleaning paid better than serving, and it required less talking, less smiling, less pretending everything was fine. Invisibility became her armor. She learned to move through rooms without disturbing the air, to leave no trace beyond perfectly made beds and spotless mirrors. Guests never learned her name. Managers only noticed when something went wrong. It was safer that way, no expectations, no disappointments. There was only one person who ever seemed to see through the careful blankness she wore. Frank, the night security guard, a retired Marine with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen too much. He worked the lobby desk from midnight to 8, and sometimes their shifts overlapped in the quiet hours before dawn. One slow night, he found her in the staff lounge scribbling in a worn notebook during her break. "What are you writing?" he'd asked, peering over her shoulder. Callie had hesitated, then turned the page toward him. Lines of Chinese characters flowed across the paper, elegant and precise. "A poem by Li Bai," she'd said quietly. "I'm translating it, just for myself." Frank had nodded slowly, as if it made perfect sense. "You know," he'd said, offering her a chocolate chip cookie from the package he always carried, "some people are born to shine, but they're so good at pretending to be dim that they forget they ever had light in them." Callie had smiled faintly. "The world doesn't need me to shine, Frank. It just needs me to be quiet." He hadn't argued, but before leaving, he'd added, "One day, you'll have to step into the light whether you want to or not. And when that day comes, you'll understand why the dark hurts so much." She hadn't believed him. Not until this morning. The voices from the conference room grew more strained. A sharp exchange in Mandarin, something about trust and deadlines. Logan's frustrated response followed English words, tumbling out too fast, too direct for the careful dance of business in China. Callie stood frozen in the hallway, mop forgotten against the wall. She knew exactly what was happening in there. She understood every nuance of the conversation, the subtle loss of face, the growing impatience. She could fix it. She could bridge the gap with a few carefully chosen words. But stepping forward meant being seen. It meant risking everything she had built to protect herself. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. The metal was cool beneath her fingers. She thought of her mother, working silently for years so her daughter could have a voice. She thought of Frank's words. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who believed words could change worlds. Callie took a breath that felt like the first one in years. Then she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The door swung open with a soft click that seemed to echo louder than it should. Every head in the conference room turned. The air was thick with tension, the kind that came from high stakes and higher egos. Logan Whitaker stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his usually impeccable suit jacket discarded over a chair, sleeves rolled up as if he'd been pacing. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, a rare crack in the polished armor of the man who'd built a tech empire before most people figured out their careers. Around the table sat his team, 3 executives in tailored suits, faces tight with concern, and across from them, the Chinese delegation, 4 men in sharp business, attire their expressions a careful mask of polite impatience. All eyes landed on Callie. She felt the weight of them like a physical force. The navy uniform, the practical shoes still damp from the hallway floor, the faint scent of cleaner clinging to her skin. She was acutely aware of how out of place she looked among the laptops and leather folios. One of Logan's executives, a middle-aged man with a perpetually furrowed brow, spoke first. "Can I help you?" Callie swallowed her throat dry. I'm from housekeeping. But I overheard, I think I can help with the translation." A beat of silence. Then the same executive frowned deeper. "This is a private meeting." Logan, who had been staring at his notes as if willing the words to rearrange themselves, looked up. His eyes, sharp blue, the kind that miss nothing in boardrooms, met hers. There was a flicker of recognition, or perhaps just confusion. Had he seen her before? In the elevator, passing in a hallway, she couldn't tell. Before anyone could dismiss her, one of the Chinese delegates, the eldest with silver at his temples and an air of quiet authority, leaned forward and said something in Mandarin. His tone was measured, but the words carried an edge of frustration about time and respect. Callie understood perfectly. She stepped further into the room, ignoring the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Dui buki darao," she began smoothly, bowing her head slightly in respect. "Wo bushi gongs de zhengshi yuangong dan wo dong neimen de hua. Rugo shuke wo yuanyi bangshu fanyi, bu daibiao renhe yi fangjishi wei le gutong." The older man's eyebrows rose slightly. He exchanged a glance with his colleagues, then nodded once. "Kei shishi." Logan stared at her, something unreadable crossing his face. Surprised skepticism. He gestured to an empty chair near the end of the table. "Please." Callie sat her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. The discussion resumed, but now with her as the bridge. She didn't just translate words, she translated meaning. When Logan pushed too directly on timelines, American-style blunt and efficient, she softened it, framing it in terms of mutual benefit and long-term partnership, preserving face for the Chinese side. When the lead delegate expressed concerns about intellectual property, she chose phrasing that acknowledged their worries without making Logan's team seem defensive. She felt the shift gradually. Shoulders relaxed. Notes were taken with less urgency. A small joke from one of the younger Chinese executives drew polite laughter, and Logan, after a moment's hesitation, joined in with a genuine smile. 2 hours passed like that, the crisis diffusing word by careful word. When the final agreements were summarized and hands shaken across the table, the atmosphere had changed entirely. The deal wasn't just saved, it was strengthened with promises of future collaboration that hadn't been on the table before. The Chinese delegation filed out with courteous bows and thanks directed specifically at Callie. Logan's team followed, murmuring stunned gratitude as they passed her chair. Then the room was empty except for the 2 of them. Logan approached slowly, as if afraid to startle her. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, with the kind of presence that filled rooms without trying. "I don't even know your name," he said quietly. "Callie Tran." "Callie." He repeated it like he was committing it to memory. "Today, you didn't just save a deal. You saved my reputation." My company's future in Asia. I don't know how to thank you. She stood smoothing her uniform self-consciously. You don't have to, I just couldn't stand by. He studied her for a long moment, something intense in his gaze. Most people would have. Most people do every day. They see someone struggling and keep walking. Callie looked away toward the floor-to-ceiling windows where Chicago sprawled below them in morning light. I've spent a long time being one of those people, she admitted softly. The ones who keep walking, who stay quiet. Logan was quiet for a beat. Well, he said finally, I'm glad you didn't today. He extended his hand, not the polished CEO handshake, but something genuine. She took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against her still cool fingers. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. Callie. She paused at the door. This won't be the last time we talk. She met his eyes then, and for the first time in years, someone looked at her like she was truly there. Like she mattered. The morning after the meeting, Callie reported to her usual shift, as if nothing had changed. She pushed her cart down the familiar corridors, restocking towels and minibars, her mind replaying the conference room in fragments, the weight of all those eyes, the way the Chinese delegate had finally smiled Logan's quiet thank you that lingered in her ears. She expected the day to pass unnoticed, the way every other day had for years. It didn't. At 10 o'clock, the head of housekeeping appeared at the service elevator, looking flustered. Callie Tran, you're wanted upstairs. 34th floor? Management. Callie's stomach dropped. Getting called to management usually meant a complaint, a guest unhappy with a folded towel, or a missed dust bunny. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed bracing for reprimand. Instead, she was led into a corner office overlooking the Chicago River. And there, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in hand, was Logan Whitaker. He turned when she entered, dismissing the manager with a polite nod. The door closed softly behind her. Coffee, he asked, gesturing to a second cup on the desk. Black, no sugar. I took a guess. Callie stared. How did you... I pay attention to details, he said simply. It's what I do. She didn't take the cup, not yet. If this is about yesterday, I was just helping, he finished. Yes. And you did it better than anyone I've ever hired for twice your salary. He set his own cup down and slid a folder across the desk. 3-month trial contract, language and cultural liaison for our Asia projects. Salary 5 times what you're making now. Benefits. Travel. Callie opened the folder with careful fingers. The numbers blurred for a moment before sharpening into reality. I don't have a degree, she said quietly. I didn't finish college. No credentials. Logan leaned against the desk, arms crossed. You have something better. Instinct. Nuance. The kind of understanding that can't be taught in a classroom. He paused. I spent yesterday watching you turn a disaster into a partnership. That's not on a resume. She looked up at him. Why me? Because you saw a problem and fixed it without being asked. Because most people with your talent are already in corner offices, but you were in the hallway with a mop. And honestly, he hesitated, the confident CEO mask slipping just slightly. Because yesterday made me realize how many people I've walked past without seeing. I don't want to do that anymore. Callie felt something tight in her chest loosen just a fraction. There's a trip to Beijing in 2 weeks, he continued. The follow-up to yesterday's deal? I'd like you there, with the team, as one of us. She thought of her tiny apartment, the instant coffee, the endless cycle of shifts that started before dawn and ended long after dark. She thought of her mother's tired hands working silently so her daughter could have more. She thought of Frank's words about light and dark. I'll need to give notice, she said finally. Logan smiled, not the polished magazine smile, but something real. Take all the time you need. 2 weeks later, Callie sat in business class for the first time in her life, watching Chicago disappear beneath the clouds. The seat beside her was empty until Logan appeared, stowing his bag in the overhead bin. Mind if I join you? Better for going over the briefing. She didn't mind. As the plane climbed, she looked out at the city, growing smaller below the hotel, a tiny glittering box among thousands of others. For the first time, she wasn't looking down from the service elevator. She was looking down from above, and the view was entirely different. 6 months had passed in a blur of airports, conference rooms, and late-night strategy sessions. Callie Tran was no longer the woman in the Navy uniform pushing a cleaning cart. She was now Director of Language and Cultural Strategy for Whitaker Dynamics Asia Division, her name on business cards and in industry articles that called her the hidden talent who changed the game. She traveled constantly, Shanghai, Singapore, Tokyo, bridging deals with the same quiet intuition that had saved that first meeting in Chicago. Reporters wanted her story, but she gave them only pieces the importance of listening, of understanding what wasn't said. She never mentioned the years of invisibility, though sometimes, in quiet moments, she felt their shadow. One crisp autumn afternoon, she returned to her old university for a guest lecture. The auditorium was packed with students who looked at her with something like awe. She stood at the podium in a simple blouse and skirt, no longer hiding behind a uniform. "I used to clean floors in a hotel," she told them, her voice steady. "I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, the world would leave me alone. But one day, I realized silence doesn't protect you. It just makes you disappear." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "Light doesn't need permission to shine. It only needs you to stop blocking it." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, she stepped outside into the golden light of falling leaves. Logan was waiting beneath a maple tree, hands in his coat pockets, no tie, no entourage, just him. He held a small wooden box, hand-carved and unpretentious. "I have something for you," he said. Callie approached the crunch of leaves under her shoes, the only sound. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple platinum with a single stone, elegant but not flashy. "This isn't about the company," he said quietly, "or the deals, or what you've done for my business." He took her hand. "It's about what you've done for me. You made me see the people I'd been walking past my whole life. You made me better. And more than that, you made me want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." Callie's throat tightened. "Callie Tran," he continued, voice soft but sure, "will you marry me? Not because the world finally sees you, but because I never want to look away again." She didn't speak at first. She just nodded, tears blurring her vision, as he slipped the ring onto her finger. They married quietly the following spring in a small ceremony, with Frank as witness and a handful of colleagues who had become friends. No extravagance, just vows spoken under the same maple tree where he'd proposed. Later, they established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students studying languages named quietly after Callie's mother. It wasn't about headlines. It was about giving others the chance she hadn't had. Some nights, Callie would wake to find Logan watching her sleep, his expression soft in the moonlight. "What are you thinking?" she'd whisper. "That I almost missed you," he'd answer. "That you were right there all those years and I never saw." She'd smile, then tracing his jaw with her fingers. "But you see me now." And he did. Every day, without fail. Callie Tran had spent years perfecting the art of being invisible. Now she had learned something far more powerful, how to be seen, and to let someone love her for everything she'd once tried to hide. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real.